My name is Ava Bennett. I am 28 years old, and the night my husband's family humiliated me at dinner, I learned that silence can betray you louder than words. I was sitting beside my husband, Ethan Whitmore, at his parents' long dining table, wearing the blue dress my father once said made me look brave. I did not feel brave. I felt watched. Every glass lifted, every fork touched the plate, every polite smile felt like part of a trial I had not agreed to attend. Across from me, Margaret Whitmore smiled like a queen who had already decided the verdict. Her husband, Charles, sat at the head of the table with a wine glass in his hand and judgment in his eyes. Ethan's sister, Olivia, kept glancing at me as if I were a stain on their family portrait. And Ethan, my husband, the man who promised my father he would protect me, he stared at his plate. That hurt more than anything they said. Because when strangers humiliate you, it is painful. When family humiliates you, it is cruel. But when the person who promised to stand beside you sits quietly while it happens, something inside you begins to understand the truth. I was not invited to that dinner as family. I was invited as a problem to be corrected. Before that night, I had spent almost 3 years trying to belong to the Whitmore family. They were wealthy in that cold, polished way that makes every room feel expensive, but not warm. Their house had white stone walls, tall windows, oil paintings, fresh flowers, and a dining room where even the silence seemed trained. Ethan came from that world. I did not. I grew up in a smaller house with a creaking porch, secondhand furniture, and a father who worked harder than any man I knew. My mother died when I was 19, and after that, my father, Daniel Bennett, became my whole safe place. He was quiet, steady, and never flashy. He ran a logistics company outside the city, wore simple shirts, drove the same black truck for years, and believed a person's value showed in how they treated others when nobody important was watching. When Ethan first met him, Dad asked him 3 questions. "Do you respect my daughter when she disagrees with you?" "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "Will you defend her when it costs you comfort?" "Yes." "And if your family ever makes her feel small, will you stand beside her or in front of them?" Ethan took my hand and said, "In front of them." My father looked at him for a long time before nodding. I believed Ethan that day. That is the worst part. I really believed him. At first, marriage felt simple. Ethan and I lived in a small apartment near the city. I worked as an event coordinator and slowly built my own client list. Ethan worked in his father's luxury furniture company. We cooked dinner together, watched old movies, argued over laundry, and talked about buying a house one day. But every Sunday, we had dinner at the Whitmore estate. That was where the little cuts began. Margaret would look at my clothes and say, "Ava, you are so brave to keep your style so simple." Olivia would ask if my dress was local and somehow make the word sound like an insult. Charles would mention families with tradition and glance at me as if I had arrived from the roadside. Ethan would squeeze my hand under the table. At first, I thought that meant, "I know, and I'm with you." Later, I learned it meant, "Please do not react." One night, Margaret asked, "Does your father still drive trucks?" I smiled politely. "He owns a logistics company." "Oh yes," she said, waving her hand. "Transportation. Very hardworking people. Hardworking people." She said it like she meant useful people. People who carry things for families like hers, then disappear through the back entrance. Another Sunday, Olivia said, "Ava, you should attend our charity gala. It would be fun for you to see how formal events are done." I had planned corporate events for years. When I reminded her, she laughed. "Oh, I mean real formal events." Everyone smiled. Ethan did not. But he did not correct her either. That became the pattern. They insulted. He went quiet. I went home hurt. Then he told me I was overthinking. "You know how Mom is," he would say. No, I knew how she chose to be. There is a difference. The final dinner was Margaret and Charles's 35th anniversary. Private family dinner, they said. No outsiders. Just family. I almost refused. Ethan begged, "Please, Ava. Just one dinner. For me." That was how he always framed it. For me. Not because they respected me. Not because he would defend me. For him. Before we left, I called Dad. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. "Hey, Dad." There was a pause. "What's wrong?" That was my father. 2 words from me, and he knew. "Nothing. Dinner with Ethan's family tonight. Do you want to go?" "I think I have to." "No, Ava," he said gently. "You may choose to, but you do not have to." I looked at myself in the mirror. Blue dress, soft curls, calm face I had practiced for people who mistook politeness for weakness. I'm trying to keep peace, Dad sighed. Peace that only survives when you stay silent is not peace. I closed my eyes. I know. Do you want me nearby? I laughed softly. Dad, I'm 28. You are also my daughter. I'll be fine. If anyone makes you feel small, he said, remember whose daughter you are. Yours. Exactly. I did not know then that he would keep his phone close all night. Margaret kissed Ethan on both cheeks. My handsome son. Then she looked at me. Ava, that dress is bold. I smiled. Thank you. Olivia air-kissed me. You came. We were starting to think you were scared of us. Should I be? Her laugh was light and fake. You're funny tonight. Charles raised his glass toward Ethan. There he is, the future of the company. Then his eyes moved to me. And Ava, of course. Of course. Like he had almost forgotten to include me. The first insult came with the soup. Margaret looked at me and said, Ava, I hear you are still doing event work. Still. As if my career was a childish habit I had failed to outgrow. Yes, I said. I have several corporate clients now. How sweet, Olivia said. Little events can be such a nice hobby. It's my business. Charles chuckled. Business is a generous word these days. Everyone with an email calls themselves an entrepreneur. I looked at Ethan. He shifted in his chair but said nothing. Margaret tilted her head. Charles, don't tease. Ava works very hard. People from modest backgrounds often do. There it was. Modest backgrounds. I placed my spoon down. What does my background have to do with my work? The table went quiet. Olivia smiled. Oh, so she can speak. Ethan leaned close and whispered, Ava, please, please. Not, Mom, stop. Not, Olivia, enough. Please, Ava. That whisper told me everything. He was not worried they would hurt me. He was worried I would make their cruelty uncomfortable. Margaret folded her hands. Since you have chosen honesty, perhaps we should be honest. My stomach tightened. Charles leaned back. Olivia's eyes lit up. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He knew something was coming. Margaret continued, we have tried very hard to welcome you, Ava, but marriage into a family like ours comes with responsibility. A family like yours? A respected family, a visible family, a family with standards. I looked at Ethan. He stared at his plate. Margaret's voice softened, which made it worse. You are sweet, but sweetness is not enough. Presentation matters. Background matters. Connections matter. And you seem determined to remain ordinary. Ordinary. The word sat in the middle of the table like a stain. I asked, is this why you invited me? Margaret glanced at Ethan. My heart stopped. Slowly, she reached beside her chair and lifted a folder. A folder. Something about it made the whole room tilt. She placed it beside my plate. These are not divorce papers, she said quickly. No one wants drama. Olivia almost laughed. It is a postnuptial agreement, Margaret continued. It protects Ethan's future assets and family interests. I did not touch it. Ethan whispered, Ava, it's practical. I turned to him. You knew. His face went pale. I knew Dad's lawyer prepared something, but I didn't know Mom would bring it tonight. But you knew. Silence. That was his confession. Charles said, families with significant assets must manage risk. Risk, I repeated. Is that what I am? Margaret smiled sadly. This is not personal. It is beside my dinner plate. Olivia sipped her wine. If you love Ethan for Ethan, it shouldn't bother you. I laughed once. It came out broken. You insult me, question my marriage, bring legal papers to dinner, and now I have to prove love by signing beside the soup? Ethan said, Ava, don't make this worse. Worse. Not, they are wrong. Not, I am sorry. Worse. I stood, and the chair scraped loudly against the floor. Margaret's expression hardened. Do not make a scene. That did it. They built the stage, wrote the script, invited the audience, placed the folder, and when I refused to bleed politely, I was making a scene. I picked up the folder. For 1 second, hope flickered in Margaret's eyes. Then I dropped it into the soup bowl. Cream soup splashed across the legal papers. Olivia gasped. Charles stood halfway. Margaret's face went white. Ethan grabbed my wrist. Ava! I looked down at his hand, then at him. Let go. He did. But the damage was already done. Because he had grabbed me faster than he had defended me. I stepped back from the table. My father asked you one question before we married, I said. Ethan looked ashamed. He asked if you would defend me when it cost you comfort. You promised yes. No one spoke. I picked up my purse. Margaret's voice turned cold. If you leave now, you prove exactly what we feared. No, I said. If I leave now, I prove I was raised better than to sit where I am measured like property. I walked toward the door. Then Charles spoke. Raised better? He said. By a truck driver? I stopped. The room froze. Even Ethan looked up. Slowly, I turned around. My father's name did not belong in Charles Whitmore's mouth. Not like that. What did you say? Charles stood fully now. Let us not pretend. Your father is a working man. Respectable enough, perhaps, but not exactly someone who understands families like ours. Margaret whispered, Charles. Not because she disagreed, because he had said the quiet part too loudly. My voice went calm. My father has more dignity in his old work boots than this entire table has in diamonds, wine, and polished silver. Charles's face darkened. That mouth is exactly the problem. Then the doorbell rang. Once. Clear. Sharp. Everyone froze. A maid entered quietly. Mr. Whitmore, there is a gentleman at the door. Charles frowned. We are not expecting anyone. The maid glanced at me. He says he is here for Mrs. Whitmore. My heart skipped. I knew before she said it. Mr. Daniel Bennett, my dad. The room changed before he even entered. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Olivia sat straighter. Charles looked annoyed. Ethan looked at me like he had just realized the night was no longer under his family's control. Then my father walked into the dining room. Plain dark jacket, gray hair, calm face, no flashy watch, no loud entrance, no need to prove anything. But every cruel person in that room suddenly remembered how to sit still. Dad's eyes found me first. Then he looked at the folder soaking in soup, then at Ethan, then at the red mark beginning to form around my wrist. His expression did not change. That was how I knew he was furious. Sweetheart, he said gently, are you ready to leave? My throat tightened. Yes. Charles stepped forward. Excuse me. This is a private family dinner. Dad turned to him slowly. And yet my daughter seems to be the only family member here without protection. Silence. Charles's face hardened. You must be Mr. Bennett. I am. I do not know what Ava told you, but this is a family matter. When a room full of adults corners my daughter with legal papers and insults her upbringing, it becomes my matter. Margaret stood. Mr. Bennett, you are misunderstanding. We were discussing practical protections. Dad looked at the ruined folder. In soup? Olivia muttered. She did that. Dad looked at her. One look. Olivia lowered her eyes. Charles tried again. With respect, you may not understand how families with significant assets manage risk. Dad remained calm. That is the second time tonight someone in this room has assumed I do not understand money. Charles gave a thin smile. I mean no offense. People usually say that after offering it. Ethan stood. Mr. Bennett, I'm sorry. This got out of hand. Dad looked at him. No, Ethan. A dinner gets out of hand when someone says the wrong thing. This was prepared. There is a difference. Ethan went pale. Dad asked me, did he know about the papers? I looked at my husband. Yes, he knew. Dad nodded once. Something important ended in that nod. Charles folded his arms. I will not be judged in my own house by a man who— My company moved your imported showroom inventory for 8 years, Dad said. Charles stopped. Margaret blinked. Dad continued, calm as ever. Bennett Logistics handled Whitmore Furniture's port transfers, customs coordination, regional storage, and high-value delivery schedules until 2 years ago. Charles's face changed. Dad looked around the table. You thought I was a truck driver because that version of Ava's father made your insults feel safer. No one spoke. Dad pulled a card from his jacket and placed it on the table in front of Charles. I sold Bennett Logistics last year for $32 million. I now consult for 3 national distribution firms and sit on the advisory board of the company reviewing your current supply chain contract. Silence. Not quiet. Silence. The kind that rings. Olivia's mouth opened. Margaret's face drained. Charles stared at the card. Ethan looked at me, but I looked away. The worst part was not that Dad had money. The worst part was that he never needed them to know. They had judged him because looking down on him made them feel taller. Dad said, I did not come here for business. I came because my daughter texted me one word. I frowned. Earlier, Before dinner, I had texted him, nervous. Dad looked at me gently. I waited down the road, just in case. A tear slipped before I could stop it. Ethan whispered, "Ava." Dad's eyes moved to him. "You promised me." Ethan flinched. "You promised that if your family made her feel small, you would stand beside her or in front of them." "I know," Ethan whispered. "No," Dad said. "You remembered. You chose not to." That sentence hit harder than shouting. Margaret tried. "Surely this can be resolved calmly." "It will be," Dad said. "Ava is leaving. Tonight. With me." Ethan stepped toward me. "Ava, wait. Let's talk at home." Home. The word hurt. I looked at him. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "I was going to explain." "When? After I signed?" "I thought if you heard it first, you'd refuse." I stared at him. "So you let them ambush me?" He looked down. That was the answer. Dad held out my coat. I put it on with shaking hands. Charles said coldly, "If Ava leaves like this, there will be consequences." Dad turned. "Charles, I have spent my life around men who confuse threats with power. Do not try that with me." Charles said nothing. Dad looked at Ethan one last time. "If you want to be a husband, start by becoming a man who can stand without hiding behind his mother's table." Then he walked me out. No one stopped us. Outside, the air was cold. Dad opened the passenger door of his old black truck. Only when we drove away did I break. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Dad did not tell me to stop. He just drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand holding mine. After a while, he said, "You are not going back there tonight." "I know. Tomorrow, you decide what you want. Not what keeps peace. Not what protects Ethan's image. What you want." "What if I don't know?" "Then start with what you don't want." I looked out at the dark road. "I don't want to be humiliated again." Dad squeezed my hand. "Good. That is a strong beginning." Part 2. The Price of Silence. I stayed at my father's house that night. Not the house I grew up in. Dad had sold that years ago and moved near the lake, into a smaller place full of plants, old books, and quiet rooms. He said silence felt better when something living shared it. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, still wearing the blue dress. The same dress Margaret had called bold. The same dress Ethan had watched me get humiliated in. My wrist still hurt where he had grabbed me, enough to remind me that when I stood up for myself, my husband's first instinct was not to protect me. It was to stop me. The next morning, Dad made eggs and coffee. He placed a plate in front of me and sat across the kitchen table. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Do you want me to tell you what I think?" "Not yet." He nodded. "Good. That surprised me. You're not going to push?" "No. You've been pushed enough." My eyes burned. Dad continued, "But I will ask one question." "What?" "If your best friend told you her husband sat silently while his family did that to her, what would you tell her?" I closed my eyes. "I'd tell her she deserves better." Dad nodded. "Then start there." By noon, Ethan came to the house. Dad opened the door and let him in. Ethan looked terrible. Wrinkled shirt, red eyes, hair messy. He stood in the living room and said, "Ava, I am so sorry." I sat on the couch. Dad stayed in the kitchen, close enough to hear, far enough to let me choose my words. Ethan took a breath. "I should have stopped them." "Yes." "I should have told you about the agreement." "Yes." "I thought if we got through dinner, I could explain later." "Explain what? That your family thinks I'm a risk?" "That's not how I see you, but it is how they see me." "I know." "And you let them." His face crumpled slightly. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of disappointing them, of losing my position, of causing a fight, of choosing wrong." I stared at him. "And while you were afraid of choosing wrong, you chose them." He looked down. The silence between us hurt, because he knew I was right. Dad entered then, holding his coffee. "Ethan," he said calmly, "do you understand what you did wrong?" Ethan nodded quickly. "I didn't defend her." "That is the easy answer. Try again." Ethan looked confused. Dad continued, "You did not only fail to defend Ava, you helped create the situation by keeping her uninformed. You brought her to a table where everyone else knew the plan. That is not silence. That is participation." The word hit me so hard I almost stopped breathing. Participation. Ethan went pale. "I didn't think of it like that." Dad nodded once. "You should have." After Ethan left, I cried upstairs. Not because I wanted to forgive him, because part of me still wanted the man I thought I married to be real. Ethan kept calling. I answered only once. He said he had moved into a hotel. He said he needed space from his parents. He said he wanted counseling. He said he loved me. I listened. Then I said, I need time. How much? I don't know. That was honest. The next day, Margaret called me. Ava, she said softly, I think we need to talk. About what? Healing. You mean business? I mean family. No, Margaret. You mean Dad. Silence. Then she said, Your father seems to have influence over a situation affecting all of us. All of us. You are married to Ethan. At dinner, I was a risk. Now I'm connected? Her breath caught. I never meant to make you feel small. You meant to make me sign. Another pause. Ava, emotions were high. No, planning was high. Emotions came after. I hung up. Something changed in me after that call. Not anger, clarity. I had spent years trying to earn a place at their table. Now I understood the table was never the prize. It was a trap. A beautiful, polished trap. Ethan started counseling alone before I agreed to join. That mattered. For once, he did something without asking me to make the first move toward comfort. After 3 sessions, I went. The counselor asked Ethan what he wanted. I want my wife back, he said. Then she asked me, I want to know if my husband exists outside his family's approval. Ethan cried. I did not comfort him immediately. That was hard, but necessary. Comfort had always been my job in his family. Even when I was the one hurt, somehow everyone waited for me to soften the room. I refused. The counselor asked Ethan what he should have done. He said, I should have told Ava before dinner. I should have refused the agreement. I should have left with her when Mom insulted her. Then he paused. And I should have understood that staying quiet was choosing a side. That was the first answer that sounded real. But real answers do not erase real damage. Meanwhile, Whitmore furniture began to crack. The supply chain contract did not go through. The board rejected the proposal. Dad did not destroy them. Their numbers did. But Margaret and Charles did not see it that way. They blamed me. Through whispers, of course. Ava is sensitive. Her father took things personally. Ethan is confused because of her influence. But whispers are risky when people already know you lied. Maya heard one at a luncheon and told me immediately. Then something unexpected happened. A former Whitmore furniture manager contacted Dad's advisory firm with documents showing Charles had hidden delivery failure rates from potential partners. That had nothing to do with me. That was business. Bad business. Within months, Whitmore Furniture closed 2 showrooms. Charles stepped down as CEO. Olivia disappeared from social media. Margaret stopped hosting dinners. And Ethan resigned. That surprised me. He came to Dad's house to tell me in person. I left, he said. Why? Because I kept saying I was trapped. But I wasn't. I was comfortable. That sentence stayed with me. Comfortable, not trapped. So many people call themselves trapped when the cage has nice furniture. Ethan found work at a smaller design firm. Less money, no family title, no automatic respect. For the first time, he had to be judged without the Whitmore name holding him up. It humbled him, slowly, painfully, sometimes honestly, sometimes not enough. Our marriage did not repair quickly. There were months of separation, counseling, awkward dinners, hard talks, and days when I missed him so much I hated myself for it. One evening, I asked Dad what he thought I should do. He sat on the porch cleaning old work gloves. You already know what I think. No, I don't. Yes, you do. You just want me to say it so you can borrow my certainty. Dad, he looked at me. I cannot decide your marriage. I can only tell you this. Forgiveness is not the same as returning, and returning is not proof of forgiveness. Choose the life where you can respect yourself. That did not make the decision easy, but it made it honest. Part 3. The table turned. 6 months after the dinner, Margaret invited me to lunch. Public restaurant. Neutral ground. Her message was formal. Ava, I would appreciate the opportunity to apologize properly. I showed Dad. He read it and said, Do you want to go? I don't know. That usually means no. Maybe. That usually means you want closure. I went. Not alone. Maya sat 2 tables away, wearing sunglasses indoors, because she said subtlety was for people with weak dramatic timing. Margaret arrived exactly on time. Elegant, polished, but thinner somehow, less certain. She stood when she saw me. Ava, Margaret, We sat. For the first time since I had known her, she did not comment on my clothes. That felt like progress. She folded her hands. I owe you an apology. I waited. She shifted, uncomfortable with silence. Good. Silence had always been their weapon. Now it was mine. The dinner was handled badly, she said. I almost stood. No, she said quickly. That is not enough. I know. I sat back. She took a breath. I humiliated you. I judged you. I treated you like an outsider in your own marriage. I used money and class to make myself feel superior, and I allowed my fear for Ethan's future to become cruelty toward you, better than I expected. Still, I stayed quiet. She lowered her eyes. I also insulted your father, because I believed a story about him that made me feel safe. What story? That he was beneath us. There it was. Honest ugliness. I appreciated it more than fake sweetness. And now? Now I know we were the ones behaving beneath decency. For a moment, I saw not the powerful mother-in-law, but a woman whose world had cracked. I did not fully forgive her that day, but I accepted the apology as a beginning. Before leaving, she said, I do not expect you to come back to family dinners. Good. She almost smiled sadly. I deserve that. Yes. I would like someday to know you without trying to improve you. Someday. Maybe. The hardest conversation was with Ethan. His betrayal had been quieter than Margaret's, but deeper. He had not called me ordinary. He had not insulted my father. He had not prepared the papers. But he had known enough, and he had chosen comfort. 8 months after the dinner, Ethan asked me to meet him at our apartment. Walking in felt strange. My books were still on the shelf. Our wedding photo still sat near the window. My blue mug was still in the kitchen. A home can become a museum faster than you think. Ethan stood near the table. No flowers, no candles, no dramatic setup. Just him, tired, nervous, real. I need to say something, he said. Okay. I used to think protecting you meant loving you privately, while keeping peace publicly. I listened. I thought apologizing afterward made up for staying silent in the moment. His voice shook. But private love is not enough when public disrespect is happening. Something in my chest tightened. He continued. I liked being the good son. I liked being praised. I liked not challenging my parents. When Mom criticized you, I told myself she meant well because admitting the truth would force me to choose. And you didn't want to choose. No, he said. I had chosen already. I just didn't want to admit I chose them. That honesty hurt, but it mattered. He placed a folder on the table. My body stiffened. He noticed. I'm sorry. I should have warned you. It's not what you think. He opened it. My resignation, my new employment contract, proof that my parents have no access to our joint accounts, a letter to your father, and a postnuptial agreement. My heart dropped. What? This one protects you. I stared at him. Andrea drafted it. Your lawyer, not mine. It says anything you build, inherit, earn, or own remains yours unless you choose otherwise. It says I have no claim to your business, your father's assets, or anything from your family. It also says if my family interferes legally or financially in our marriage, I carry the cost of protecting you. I could not speak. I am not asking you to sign tonight, he said. I am not asking you to come home. I just wanted you to know I finally understand what should have happened. For the first time, he did something that did not demand my comfort, that did not erase the damage. But it was different. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing tonight. That answer broke me more than begging would have. We did not move back together immediately. I refused to rush healing just because Ethan had finally found courage. We continued counseling. We went on walks. We had awkward dinners. We talked about family boundaries, money, children, respect, and what happens when love and loyalty conflict. Ethan wrote my father a letter, not an email, a letter. He apologized for breaking his promise. He wrote that he confused peace with silence and loyalty with obedience. Dad read it twice, then placed it in a drawer. What do you think? I asked. Dad said, words are seeds. We'll see what grows. A year after the dinner, Ethan and I hosted a small dinner at our apartment. Charles took longer. Pride is a slow disease. He first sent a formal apology through Ethan. I sent it back with one message. If he wants to apologize, he knows my name. 2 months later, Charles asked to meet Dad and me. We met at a quiet cafe. Charles looked older. Stress had humbled him more than wisdom, but humbled was still humbled. He did not try small talk. I insulted you, he said to me, and I insulted your father. I was wrong. I waited. I judged your background because I believed money made mine superior. That was arrogant and shameful. Dad said nothing. Charles turned to him. And professionally, Daniel, I dismissed your expertise because I did not know your name carried weight. That revealed more about me than about you. Dad nodded once. Correct. I almost smiled. Charles looked back at me. I do not expect forgiveness. Good, I said. His mouth twitched, accepting the hit. But I am sorry. Your apology does not undo what happened. But I accept that you said it. That was all I could give. Olivia never properly apologized. She sent a message that said, I'm sorry things got so dramatic. I did not reply. Some people apologize to end discomfort, not to repair damage. You are allowed to leave those messages unanswered. 2 years after the dinner, Ethan and I were still married, but not because I was afraid to leave. That mattered. We rebuilt slowly, with clear rules. No private family ambushes, no legal surprises, no financial pressure, no insulting my father, no mom means well. If Margaret crossed a line, Ethan handled it immediately, not later, not privately after I cried. Immediately. The first time I saw him do it, we were at a small lunch. Margaret said, Ava prefers simpler spaces. Ethan put down his fork. Mom, don't do that. She blinked. Do what? Turn preference into status. Ava likes what she likes. Leave it there. The table went quiet. Margaret nodded. You're right. It was a small moment. But small moments rebuild trust the way small insults destroy it. One brick at a time. Dad never fully relaxed around Ethan again. That was okay. They developed something quieter. Not father and son. Not friends. Respectful witnesses. Dad watched Ethan change. Ethan watched Dad stay steady. That was enough. One evening, Dad and I stood on his porch watching the lake. He asked, Are you happy? I thought about it. Yes. Because of him? I smiled. Because of me? Dad smiled too. That's my girl. I leaned my head on his shoulder. After a while, I asked, How did you know to come that night? You texted nervous. Then you stopped replying. I know you. You respond when you're okay. You waited outside the estate? Down the road. For how long? Long enough. That's not an answer. He looked at me. The night your mother died, I promised myself you would never have to wonder if someone was coming for you. My throat tightened. I'm 28. You were my daughter before you were anyone's wife. I cried then. Not from pain. From being loved correctly. That kind of love changes what you tolerate. That was the real lesson of the dinner. Not that rich people can be cruel. Not that husbands can be weak. Not that fathers can make dramatic entrances. The lesson was this. When you remember what real love feels like, fake love becomes easier to recognize. Real love does not corner you with papers. Real love does not ask you to shrink so others can stay comfortable. Real love does not watch you being humiliated and call silence peace. Real love drives down the road and waits, just in case. Years later, people still talk about the dinner. They call it the night Daniel Bennett humbled the Whitmores. They talk about Charles's face when Dad revealed who he was. They talk about Margaret going silent. They talk about Olivia deleting her post. They talk about Ethan finally standing up after almost losing me. But when I remember that night, I remember something else. I remember standing at the table in my blue dress, heart shaking, voice steady, finally understanding that I did not have to earn a place where I was being disrespected. I remember my father walking in calmly, not to fight my battle for me, but to stand beside me while I chose myself. And I remember the ride home, crying in the passenger seat, Dad holding my hand, the estate disappearing behind us, and the first breath I took when I realized I was leaving humiliation behind, not love, because love came with me, in an old black truck, with quiet eyes, and a father who never needed a mansion to prove he was powerful. So yes, my husband's family humiliated me at dinner. They thought they were exposing my weakness. They thought they were proving I did not belong. They thought I would sign, smile, and spend the rest of my life grateful for a seat at their table. But then Dad arrived, and suddenly, the table turned. Not because he was richer than they expected, not because he had business influence, not because Charles needed his approval. Those things only exposed the hypocrisy. The real power was simpler. My dad knew my worth before anyone in that room knew his. And because of him, I remembered it too. That was the night I stopped begging to be accepted by people who measured value in money, status, and silence. That was the night Ethan learned love without courage is not protection. That was the night Margaret learned elegance without kindness is just decoration. That was the night Charles learned a working man can walk into a mansion and still be the strongest person in the room. And that was the night I learned that being someone's wife should never make me forget that I was already someone's daughter. A daughter loved deeply, raised strongly, and never, ever beneath anyone.